Mike Francesa bids farewell to WFAN, sports talk radio in fitting fashion. 3 decades worth of New York sports and media dignitaries lined up for their final benedictions Thursday from the radio talker known as the Sports Pope. In his inimitable style, and one by one, he parceled them out. "You had a great career and now you're in the midst of another one," he told Tiki Barber. "You know all the stocks." He told Jim Cramer. "You and Omar Minaya did an amazingly underrated job with the Mets." He told Willie Randolph. "You set the mark for transitioning from player to broadcaster." He told Tim McCarver. "You've got a big decision ahead of you in a couple days." He told outgoing New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. The supplicants had come, 85 of them, all told to call upon said Pope, Mike Francesa, who was hosting his penultimate WFAN radio show, This Is Your Life, style, from a theater at the Paley Center for Media, the former Museum of Broadcasting. Friday's show, the final one, transmits from his usual studio and consists of his regular callers. He performed before a small crowd of fans and people connected to the radio station, though he made no effort to modulate his regular delivery to fit the setting. He may as well have been in the studio, anyway, due to whatever miscalculation in ticket distribution. The auditorium was never more than a quarter full. The phone lines, on the other hand, Dick Ebersol, Bob Costas, Jay Wright, Otis Anderson, Keith Hernandez, they all wanted to tell him what a triumph his show had been. How fair and decent he had been to them while he reigned over the sporting world in New York. Mike Breen, Regis Philbin, Kurt Warner, Jim Nance, Ian Eagle, a former board operator for Francesa, Linda Cohn, they all wanted him to know what a run he had had. Jay Glazer and Lawrence Taylor called in with off-color stories. Tributes came in from the basketball coaches at Hofstra and Iona. The callers would say something nice about Francesa, and then Francesa, in most cases, would reply with something less nice, but still broadly gracious. And then he would move on to the next caller. John Calipari called in, and they reminisced about the good old days, like when Francesa and his old partner, Chris Mad Dog Russo, bet the coach that his Uma's Minutemen couldn't beat Fordham. Francesa and Russo were stuck schlepping to Amherst in the rain to MC a dinner for the program. "He takes no prisoners, and I take no prisoners," Francesa said. "That's why we get along." Farewell shows tend to be slathered with treacle, full of disingenuous praise. But Francesa's voice, first paired with Russo in 1989 and then solo since 2008, really has soundtracked so many New York afternoons for almost 30 years. Francesa's shows were often the only place to find extended interviews with embattled coaches and obstinate jocks, alongside the calls from preening Yankee lovers, despondent Mets fans, and the sad sacks who wanted to spend but 90 seconds talking hockey. Francesa made an art of sparring with callers, sometimes condescending to them, sometimes berating them. "It was all an act," he has said, but he has performed this act for tens of thousands of hours of radio. Those who would consider themselves his biggest fans know no other version of Mike Francesa. And deservedly he bade us almost farewell from a museum. WFAN invented the sports talk radio format, and Francesa was the station's biggest sports talking star. What's funny about Francesa's great triumph as a sports talker, and for all these years it has been funny, is that he approached his job in what ought to have been the wrong way. Sports talk is a fan's medium. It's right there in the name, WFAN. Successful hosts are fans themselves, perhaps more informed than the average bleacher creature, but no more regal. But Francesa considered himself an oracle, a grandee. He believed his sports opinions were the definitive ones. In any other setting he'd be a mere pundit. But it was his show. Like a great columnist, he held court on whose stock was rising and falling in his universe. He could be needlessly tough, and he could play favorites. On occasion, he could be defiantly uninformed. But his redoubtable memory of every New York sports happening since the 50s allowed him to pull his shtick off. Coaches and executives once wanted to stay on his good side to keep their jobs. Athletes once wanted to stay on his good side so that they might have post-retirement careers in broadcasting. Cliff Floyd, Bobby Oyeda, Steve Phillips, all called him to thank Francesa for nudging them into sports media. He made friends. He made stars. And he made millions. Authority, though, that was what he really craved, and, for the most part, got. After Russo departed, there was no one in position to challenge Francesa's views, except for the callers, all of whom he could dismiss with the wave of a hand or the push of a button. But what he built cannot survive. Thursday's broadcast was a farewell, not just for Francesa's WFAN career, but the notion that any one talker could render definitive, consequential judgments upon athletes and coaches. Star players make enough money now to avoid worrying about post-retirement broadcast careers. Coaches, meanwhile, have become mere cogs in complicated apparatuses, no longer leaders given free rein. And all parties these days are assessed by metrics far more sophisticated and objective than the judgment of one sports junkie with a microphone. India bequeathing Francesa's time slot to a trio of good-natured relative youngsters: Chris Garland, a former Francesa producer, Bart Scott, a loudmouth ex-Jets linebacker, and Maggie Gray, who had been a digital anchor here at Sports Illustrated. WFAN has acknowledged that Francesa's domineering mode departs the station with him. Francesa, who said on Thursday that he was entertaining 3 offers for his next gig, appears to believe he can take his clout elsewhere. It's genuinely difficult to imagine how that would work. Late in November, the outgoing host mounted a last stand of sorts when he scorned the leadership of the 2-10 New York Giants for benching Eli Manning in favor of Geno Smith. A week later, coach Ben McAdoo and general manager Jerry Reese had been fired, and Manning had returned to his starting job. It was a victory for Francesa. His rant was seen everywhere, and for Manning too. For a moment the pair had asserted their considerable might. Just for a moment, though. Manning projects to be replaced in New York before the 2018 season. And Francesa bows out Friday. On Thursday, Manning got the loudest ovation of the 85 callers. "You're a legend in this field," Manning told Francesa. Francesa appeared genuinely touched. He talked for a minute or two about what a good person Manning was. Then they both had to move on. "Thank you for calling in," he told Manning. "It means a lot." Mike Francesa, Julio and their final drive to WFAN. The end of the road at last was in sight Friday morning, in a figurative sense. But first there was one last time for Mike Francesa to navigate the actual road leading him to his final day after 30 years at WFAN. "I'm sure people have heard about this long enough, really. It's been in the public eye for about 24 months now," he said of his extended goodbye. "Now they don't have to hear about it anymore. Finally, we've reached the day. This day has been a line of demarcation for a long time. I have thought about this day for a long time. I've thought about this drive for a long time. So, it's finally here." At the time, Francesa's longtime driver, protector and confidant, Julio Rosa, was navigating the customary traffic on the line as they made the commute from Francesa's home in Manhasset to WFAN's studios in Soho. Soon Francesa would be on the air, planning to take calls for most of 5 hours, then spend the last half hour or so speaking to listeners solo. The day began early. Francesa's wife, Ro, recently underwent surgery and has had trouble sleeping through the night. That, combined with her thoughts about the final day at WFAN, had her up at 4 a.m. "My wife is a big listener and is very emotional about this," Francesa said. "She has been very emotional about this for days. She thought it was the right time for me to leave. But she's been very emotional about it. I've been talking to her since 4 this morning. It's been crazy." Francesa still was fielding texts and emails Friday from people reacting to Thursday's show at the Paley Center in Manhattan, which featured 85 guests. Most calling in, some in person and one pre-recorded. My guys did a great job with that show, really unbelievable, he said. The last guest was the man Francesa identified as the best New York athlete in his 30 years. Hands down. That would be Lawrence Taylor, who closed with an the blue off-color joke about strip clubs. In one way it was fitting, in one way I guess it was also fitting. Francesa said that he would leave the way he left with a typical LT remark that makes you shake your head. While Francesa is looking forward to more time with his children. 12-year-old twins and an 11-year-old, he and Rosa will miss their rides to and from work together, which range from an hour on a very good day to one very bad day that required 4.5. The average is 90 minutes to 2 hours. They do not listen to sports talk radio together. More often, especially over the last couple of years, the radio dial and discussions have focused on politics. Francesa voted for Donald Trump for president. Rosa very much did not. People assumed that they know Mike, said Rosa, who turned 50 on Friday. They don't know Mike. I earned a measure of respect for Mike in the last year that I never thought could go higher. He never once told me to shut up. He never once told me my opinion didn't matter. He listened to me, even if we were on opposite ends of the argument. I spoke freely. If you were a fly on the wall in this car you would not have known who the boss was and who the employee was. Outside of this glass windshield there's a lot wrong. There's nothing wrong right here. This is what America should be. There's nothing but love and respect. Rosa, a retired New York City police detective who lives on Long Island, has worked for Francesa since 2009. What did they think the drive home Friday night would be like? It will be interesting, Francesa said. Knowing us it will be quiet. Sometimes we don't say a word. I might be tired at the end of the show today. Thursday I was as tired as I've been after a show in a long time. Speaking of the lie, Francesa said he has tried when speaking on the radio to imagine one-on-one interactions with people stuck on it, just like he often is. My whole life I've thought about the lie and the guy sitting in traffic on his way, tapping the steering wheel, he said. I wonder what's important to him. Francesa declined to comment on his strained relationship with Chris Carlin, a former Mike and the Mad Dog producer who starting Monday will be heard in Francesa's old-time slot. But he did say he expects the station to carry on successfully without him. Hopefully things will work out for them, he said of the new show, which will feature Carlin, Bart Scott and Maggie Gray. I think the fan has a culture and a foundation that's solid. I think it was well built. I think it has made inroads in people's lives. I think they'll give the new show a chance, and we'll see how it works out. Who knows what it's going to sound like? But if people give them a chance, maybe it will work out. Rosa said listeners are treating Francesa's departure almost like their mourning. He said he had thought about that and realized the feeling is different from that of, say, fans of a musician. Rosa, who called himself a die-hard fan of the late musician Prince, said, I can still play those albums, I can still play those records. The people that live and die with Mike, on Monday they can't flip on that switch and hear this man's voice and have that part of their day that matters so much to them. That's the struggle. Rosa said his final day driving Francesa to Manhattan was tough. I got to do one thing that I love as a cop and then another, and there will never be anything in my life that I could do that will matter as much to me as my time with Mike and the promise that he kept to hire him and the bond we've made. He said, I'll miss him more than he'll ever know.